Billionaire finds homeless teen dancing for his paralyzed daughter. What happens next will shock you. Rain hammered the marble driveway like fists from the sky, pounding the polished stone until it shined like a mirror of every regret Richard Whitman ever tried to hide. The billionaire stepped out of his armored SUV, the door slamming behind him with a heavy thud that echoed through the estate grounds. He expected silence. He expected the usual emptiness that lived in the spaces money couldn't fill. But instead, he froze. The world didn't wait for him to breathe. In the reflection of the metal security mirror, he saw movement where there should have been stillness. A barefoot boy, soaked to the bone, spinning and gliding across the pavement with a grace that didn't match the street-worn clothes clinging to his body. And behind the iron bars of the gate, watching with eyes wide and shining with something like hope, sat a girl in a wheelchair. His daughter, Maya. The daughter he thought he'd lost long before her body stopped walking. For 2 years she hadn't smiled. Not truly. Not since the accident that took her mother and left her legs silent. Doctors tried everything. Therapists spoke in circles. Specialists charged fortunes to say the same words. These things take time, but time only made the house quieter. Time made the laughter fade. Time turned Richard into a man who controlled every part of life except the part that mattered most. And now, here, in the rain, in front of a boy dancing on cracked pavement, her lips trembled. They trembled like they were remembering something her body forgot. Then they rose, slow but certain, lifting into a smile Richard didn't expect and wasn't ready for. A spark. A laugh. A tiny sound that sliced through the thunder inside his chest. For a moment, Richard didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a father who'd just seen a miracle. He stormed to the gate, shoes slipping slightly on the wet stone, breath uneven though he didn't know why. The boy stopped mid-spin. His chest rose and fell like he'd been running for miles, though his feet stayed rooted to the ground. Fear flickered in his eyes, but something else sat beside it. Pride. Richard stared at him through the bars, rain dripping down both their faces. Why? Richard demanded without raising his voice. The boy swallowed. His voice cracked but didn't break. I dance. So she remembers she's alive. The words hung in the air like lightning, lighting corners of Richard's heart he'd boarded up years ago. But business instincts kicked in, sharp as a blade. Security lights flickered. A patrol car rolled by on the road beyond the estate, sirens humming in the distance like the memory of cameras and reporters and headlines that once tore through his life when Maya's accident made the world feel entitled to their pain. He thought of every headline he fought to bury, every whisper about his money not being enough to save her spirit. And now some homeless kid was here, stirring emotions Richard spent years suppressing. Who allowed this? Who let this stranger near his daughter? The fear of losing control felt louder than the rain. Richard's voice hardened. Get away from this property. Now. The words didn't shake, but something inside him did. Jamal. He didn't know the boy's name yet, but his body carried the name like music. Stepped back slowly, step by reluctant step, never breaking eye contact with Maya. His toes curled against the cold pavement. Water dripped off his eyelashes like tears he never let fall. As he backed away, Maya reached forward, fingers gripping the bars as if they could pull her closer to something she hadn't felt since her mother's laugh echoed through the halls. Her voice cracked like thin ice. Dad, please, don't take this away from me. The plea hit him harder than the rain ever could. Richard turned, heart pounding against the walls he built around it. Conflicted, angry, confused. He felt like a man being pulled in 2 directions, by money and by love, by control and by memory, by fear and by hope. Before he could answer her, before he could breathe in the weight of her words, the heavy gate slid shut with a metallic boom that echoed across the courtyard. The sound didn't just close space, closed hearts. It sealed silence between them, the kind of silence that felt louder than screams. Richard stood unmoving, rain soaking his expensive suit, but he didn't feel cold. He felt hollow. Jamal was gone from sight, but his presence lingered like music that hadn't finished its last note. Maya's eyes burned into him from behind the glass door of the mansion, as she watched her father choose control once again. The driveway glistened with water, but it looked like tears that never found a face to fall from. The night drew darker, but Maya didn't cry. Not after Jamal left. Not after the gate closed. Not even after Richard walked inside without saying a word. Something had changed in her eyes, something Richard didn't recognize yet. But he felt it. He felt the ground shift beneath the security of his wealth. He felt the storm outside mirror the storm inside. He poured himself a drink he didn't touch and stood at the tall windows overlooking the driveway. The rain fell harder, making the world blur, but he swore he still saw footprints where the boy had danced, as if the pavement held memory even when people tried not to. Hours passed, but the image wouldn't leave him. Jamal spinning through the storm while Maya watched with a smile that pierced the darkness that swallowed her for years. Richard didn't know what hurt more, the joy he saw on her face or the fact that someone else had given it to her. Money bought everything except what mattered most. The thought clung to him like wet clothes, heavy and hard to peel away. He didn't sleep. Maya didn't either. The mansion was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Not anymore. Something had awakened, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. In that silence, Richard wondered what it meant when a boy with nothing could give his daughter something he never could. He wondered why it hurt, why it mattered, why he couldn't forget. But he didn't have answers, only questions burning like flames he tried to hide. Outside, the rain didn't stop, but Maya's tears did. And somewhere deep inside a man who believed money could fix everything, a small crack formed. A fracture where light might someday slip in. Rain still clung to the iron bars long after that first encounter, drying in thin lines that looked like fingerprints of a moment Richard kept trying to forget. Every morning after, he walked into his office with a mug of coffee he never finished, pulled back the heavy curtains, and looked down at the driveway. And every morning Jamal was there, dancing, silent, steady, hopeful. His bare feet moved across cracked pavement like he was tracing memories on the ground, memories nobody else could see. Richard told himself he wasn't watching. He was simply keeping track of a risk, managing a threat, but his eyes stayed fixed longer than they should, like he was waiting for the boy to stop coming, waiting for the story to end on its own, so he didn't have to decide how to play the role of father instead of gatekeeper. Below, Maya waited too. She wheeled herself to the edge of the garden path every morning, hands tightening around the rims, fingers trembling with anticipation as she watched Jamal from a distance. But Richard refused to let them meet again. He told himself walls protected, wealth protected, distance protected. He believed that if he controlled every doorway, every gate, every visitor, he could shield Maya from disappointment, heartbreak, exposure. But deep down, he knew he was shielding himself even more. Shielding himself from hope, because hope hurt when it didn't last. Rumors spread like winter fog across the high-end neighborhood. Whispers traveled from porch to porch, spilling into brunch tables and charity galas. The billionaire's daughter is smiling again, but he won't let her see the boy. Maybe money really does make people heartless. Richard told himself he didn't care about gossip. Until the day Maya stopped speaking altogether. She rolled her chair into her room and closed the door. Hours passed, then days. She refused food, pushing plates away without a word. She skipped therapy. She stared at the walls like they were the only thing left that understood her. Richard hired new therapists, new nutritionists, new specialists. They all said the same thing. She needs purpose, Mr. Whitman. But they didn't know what he saw every morning. The purpose she had waiting at the gate. Still, Jamal came. He danced with no music, letting the rhythm live only in his bones. Cars rolled past the estate gates, luxury wheels slicing through puddles, sending muddy water across his bare feet. The splashes didn't stop him. The cold didn't slow him. The silence didn't break him. He just kept moving, like stopping would make the world forget he ever existed. One morning, Richard couldn't take the view from the window anymore. He stepped outside, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the wet gravel. Jamal slowed but didn't stop until Richard was close enough to feel his breath. "Why do you keep coming?" Richard asked sharply, his voice slicing through the air like a command from an office boardroom. Jamal didn't blink. His chest rose once, steady. Because nobody came for me. The words hit Richard harder than he expected. He felt something twist inside. Resentment, regret, maybe both tangled together. He wanted to say something in return, something sharp or dismissive, something that would put the world back in order. But pride wrapped itself around his silence. He turned away and walked back inside, leaving Jamal standing alone in the cold, feet stained with dirt and hope. Days passed, and the tension grew thicker than winter winds. Board members called Richard with tight voices, reminding him that public sympathy could sway investor confidence. Control the narrative, they said. Any association with controversy could cost us. His assistant leaned close during a meeting, voice soft but heavy with meaning. Sir, the public adores the dancing boy. Richard's jaw tightened so hard his teeth ached. He built his empire on being untouchable, above sentiment, above vulnerability. But Jamal was rewriting that image without asking permission. That night, long after the house went quiet, Richard walked down the hallway toward Maya's room. The carpet muffled his steps, but nothing could quiet the sound coming from behind her door. Soft sobs, broken breaths, the voice of loss that never healed. It sounded like his wife on the night of the accident, crying into his chest as if her tears could rewind time. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for the door, but he stopped. He couldn't open it, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know who he would be if his daughter saw him break. He stood there in the hallway, frozen, while her sobs faded into the walls like ghosts of the past. Downstairs, the night grew colder, but Jamal was still outside. Richard watched from the window as the boy danced long after his legs should have stopped. His movement slowed, steps faltered, body shaking from exhaustion and cold. Yet he kept going, as if quitting would erase every smile he ever brought to someone else's life. Richard pressed a hand against the cold glass, muscles tense, wanting to shout, wanting to open the gate, wanting to do something. Anything, other than watch. But he didn't move. Pride held him in place once again. And Jamal danced until his legs finally gave out, collapsing on the pavement without an audience to catch him but the night sky. The mansion was warm, heated by electricity and wealth, but warmth was something else. Something Richard no longer knew how to hold. He walked away from the window and stared into the darkness of his office, the silence louder than any storm. He thought about walls, how he built them to protect his daughter, his reputation, his heart. But walls didn't just keep dangers out. They kept love out too. Outside, the first hint of frost clung to the driveway where Jamal fell. Inside, Maya lay awake in her room, staring at a ceiling that felt like a cage. And Richard sat alone in his office, surrounded by everything money could buy, haunted by everything it couldn't. Wealth bought heat, but warmth remained out of reach. The morning air was sharp enough to bite, the kind of cold that made breath hang heavy like unanswered questions. Richard stood at his office window again, coffee cooling untouched in his hand, waiting for the familiar flicker of movement on the pavement outside the gate. But this time, nothing moved. No shadow spinning. No feet gliding across the cracked ground. No silent rhythm cutting through the stillness. For the first time since that rainy day, the space outside the Whitman estate was empty. Still, lifeless. The pavement felt wrong without Jamal's footsteps drawing hope into it. Richard frowned, telling himself it was just coincidence. A missed day, a break in routine. But something in him tightened, something he couldn't name yet. Downstairs, a plate clattered to the floor. The nurse rushed toward Maya's room, but Richard was already moving. He found his daughter in the hallway, hands shaking around the rims of her wheelchair, eyes wide with fear he hadn't seen since the accident. Her lips trembled, not with hope this time, but with panic. She pointed toward the gate as if she couldn't believe what she didn't see. "Dad?" she whispered, voice rough like she'd swallowed tears. "Find him, please." Richard hesitated, pride rising again like a wall he built too high. But then he saw it, the streaks of wet across her wheels, proof she had rolled outside in the cold morning. searching the driveway for a boy her father pushed away. He saw the way her tears ran down her cheek and disappeared into her collar, the sound of her breath stuttering like she was afraid to lose again. His pride snapped like thin ice. Richard yelled for the driver. "Warm up the car. Now." He didn't care about meetings. He didn't care about optics. He only cared about the look on his daughter's face. The look of someone who had found something precious and was terrified it was gone. The black luxury SUV rolled down streets Richard usually passed without noticing. The kinds of streets where the lights flickered, where people bundled coats tight and hurried their steps, where couches on porches became beds for nights too long. They searched under bridges where steam rose from grates like ghostly warnings. They checked alleys where stray cats darted past dumpsters. They drove past shelters with lines around the block, past soup kitchens that opened their doors hours early because winter didn't care about schedules. Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years, urgency without control. They finally found him behind a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Jamal lay curled near a loading dock, shivering so violently his fingers twitched against the concrete. His clothes were thinner than the wind. His shoes were gone. His eyes were half open, staring into nothing like he was already halfway gone. Richard stepped out of the SUV without his coat, without hesitation. He knelt beside Jamal, knees pressed into frozen ground, the cold shooting pain up his legs, but he didn't move. For the first time, the billionaire lowered himself. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but out of something that felt alarmingly close to love. "Why didn't you come?" he whispered, voice shaking even though he tried to steady it. His breath fogged the air between them like a fragile bridge. Jamal's voice cracked as he answered, barely more than a breath. "I lost my place at the shelter, couldn't shower. I didn't want your daughter to see me like this." The words hit Richard harder than any headline ever printed about him. Jamal wasn't absent because he didn't care. He was absent because he cared too much. Silence filled the alley, heavier than the storm of the first day they met. It wrapped around Richard like a truth he couldn't hide from. Dignity meant more than comfort, and pride wasn't just his burden to bear. People stared as Richard lifted Jamal into his arms. Expensive suits scraping against brick walls, knees buckling from weight and cold. Some took out phones. Some whispered, but he ignored every stare, every question, every camera lens searching for a story. He carried Jamal into the warm car, into the mansion, past the same gates he once used as walls. Inside, the heat hit them both like a shock. Servants froze in surprise. Nurses gasped. But Richard didn't stop. He brought Jamal into a guest room usually reserved for visiting CEOs, draped blankets over him, ordered food, hot water, clothes. He didn't ask permission. He didn't calculate cost. He just acted. Days passed, and warmth returned to Jamal's cheeks. His hands stopped shaking. His voice steadied. Maya visited every day in her wheelchair, eyes glowing like a lamp relit after years in the dark. She didn't speak much, not yet, but her presence said what her words couldn't. "Thank you for coming back." Richard watched them from the doorway, unsure when he became the outsider in his own home, unsure why that didn't feel like a punishment anymore. When Jamal recovered enough to stand on his own, Richard entered the room wearing a soft expression his board would never recognize. He cleared his throat, awkward like a man learning how to ask instead of command. "Dance?" But this time, for both of us. They met in the ballroom Richard hadn't opened since his wife died. The room smelled faintly of dust and memory. Chandeliers hung overhead like frozen stars. Sunlight slipped through tall windows, catching dust in golden currents. Maya rolled to the center of the room, her wheels squeaking on polished floors that hadn't felt life in years. Richard stood near the wall, arms crossed not in judgment, but in containment, afraid his heart might break open if he relaxed even a little. Jamal closed his eyes. Music played, soft at first, then louder, filling corners of the room that had held silence too long. He began to move, not like before, not like a street performer fighting for attention. This time he danced like the room mattered, like the people watching mattered, like he mattered. His feet slid, spun, paused, rose. Every movement felt like a story unfolding. Pain, hope, loss, faith, resilience. Richard felt his chest tighten, breath catching as if someone pressed a hand to his ribs. He saw pieces of his wife in Jamal's steps, the rhythm she used to hum, the grace she used to hold, the light she carried even when darkness tried to claim her. And then Maya, she tried. Her hands pressed against the armrests. Her legs trembled. Her voice let out a tiny cry, not of pain, but of effort. And slowly, inches that felt like miles, she lifted herself up. Just an inch, just a moment, but enough to change everything. Richard gasped, knees weakening, hands slamming against the wall for balance. Jamal froze mid-step, tears streaking his face. Maya didn't stay standing long, but she stood. The world outside didn't know yet, but a power shift had begun. Not from wealth to poverty or weakness to strength, but from silence to connection, from walls to bridges. And for the first time in years, Richard believed music might save what money never could. The story spread faster than Richard ever imagined, slipping through news feeds, breakfast conversations, barbershops, and school cafeterias until everyone seemed to know. The billionaire who helped the homeless dancer who helped his daughter walk again. Cameras camped outside the estate gates. Reporters raised microphones like weapons and lifelines all at once. Investors called nonstop, eager to connect their brand to this new story of hope and redemption. Some saw opportunity, some saw risk. But Richard, he finally stopped looking at headlines like mirrors and started looking at his own reflection instead. He stood on the balcony one crisp morning, watching Maya and Jamal laugh in the courtyard below, their voices echoing like warmth through a house that once felt like a museum of grief. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like his mansion was built from marble and money. It felt like it was built from second chances. Inside, the staff whispered but not with fear. This time it was admiration. The tension between them lifted, replaced by something softer. Music drifted from the ballroom most nights now, melodies rushing up the staircase like stairway wind, seeping into corners that had known silence too long. Maya practiced standing when no one was looking, using the bar Jamal installed. Jamal cooked simple meals in the giant kitchen, humming to himself like someone who finally felt safe enough to dream. Richard walked slower through the halls, letting memories settle without crushing him. He passed framed photos of his late wife without flinching, sometimes even touching the glass with steady fingers, as if reminding himself she would have wanted life again. Richard made a decision one night after watching Jamal help Maya balance while she took 3 small steps. The steps were shaky, barely there, but they weren't imagined. They were real. He saw Maya laugh, really laugh, and Richard felt something in his chest unlock, like a window pushed open after years of dust. That same night, he stayed up until dawn drafting plans with architects and board advisors. But this time, it wasn't about profit or expansion. It was about purpose. The next week, Richard stood before his inner circle. Lawyers, investors, family advisors, and said words that left them speechless. "I'm funding a community dance center, and I'm naming it after Jamal." One advisor choked back a gasp. Another stared at the floor like the world had shifted beneath him. Someone whispered, "In his name." But Richard didn't waver. He hired Jamal not as charity but as leadership, lead instructor, full salary, full housing, full dignity. Papers were signed, permits approved, and within months, a renovated warehouse stood in the heart of the city, its doors painted deep red like a heartbeat against gray streets. The sign above the entrance read, "The Jamal Whitman Center for Movement and Hope," though Jamal never asked for the Whitman name to be attached. Richard insisted because giving wasn't about erasing the past, but honoring who helped shape the future. The opening day drew a crowd that wrapped around the block. Kids with hunger in their eyes and rhythm in their bones pressed close to the entrance, holding homemade signs and hand-me-down sneakers. Parents clutched coats tighter, whispering to each other, "Do you think he'll teach our kids? Do you think this could give them a chance?" Photographers took pictures that glimmered with more than flash. They captured hope mid-bloom. Rich donors stood at the back, trying not to look out of place. Jamal adjusted his tie twice before Richard straightened it for him, laughing softly like a father proud of a son. Maya rolled to the stage with confidence, head held high. The music cut, and silence fell like velvet. Maya wheeled forward, gripping the microphone with hands that still shook yet didn't falter. Her voice rang out, small at first, then strong. My legs will take time, but my hope stands tall, thanks to Jamal. And thanks to my dad for learning what love really means. She paused as her voice cracked at the edge of memory. The crowd went still, breaths held, eyes glimmering. Even the wealthiest man in the room, Richard Whitman himself, felt tears slip down his cheek without shame. Nobody laughed. Nobody stared. Nobody questioned. They felt. Jamal stepped forward next. He didn't need a speech prepared. His story was already written in every scar on his hands, every blister on his feet, every night on concrete that didn't claim him. His voice trembled once, then steadied like a dancer finding center. You can lose everything, but keep moving. Someone will feel your rhythm. The room didn't clap at first. They just breathed, slow, deep, together, like the words needed space to land. Then applause burst like thunder, rising high, echoing off brick walls, sweeping across every soul in the room. Richard looked at Maya, eyes soft, voice low enough for only her to hear. You saved me by asking me to save someone else. She squeezed his hand, tears shimmering but not falling. She didn't need words. Her smile spoke enough. The music started again. Jamal took center floor. Children gathered around him, watching, waiting, leaning forward as if he held the future in his fingertips. Each movement he made told a story older than his years. Resilience, hunger, dignity, love. Slowly, others joined. Kids from the street. Parents too shy to dance but willing to try. Donors whose suits didn't match the beat but whose hearts finally did. Richard didn't dance. Not yet. But he tapped his fingers in time, feeling the rhythm pulse through him like a heartbeat rediscovered. At the edge of the crowd, Maya stood again. Just a second. Just enough for Jamal to see. Enough for Richard's breath to catch. Enough to prove that movement doesn't always start in the body. It begins in the soul. As Jamal spun into a final turn, the audience rose. Not for money, not for status, not for power, but for humanity. Applause thundered like rainstorms on marble. Tears and laughter mixed in the air. Flashbulbs popped. But for once, nobody looked embarrassed to feel deeply. In that moment, the richest man in the room wasn't the billionaire. It was the dancer who refused to disappear and the girl who refused to give up. Later, as the night closed and lights dimmed, Richard stood alone at the back of the hall, staring at the sign bearing Jamal's name. He placed a hand over his heart and whispered to nobody and everybody, "The greatest riches are found in the lives we lift, not the fortune we keep." And somewhere above them, beyond glass and chandeliers and echoes of applause, the music kept playing, soft, steady, eternal, just like hope.